Evening, everyone. Sorry, we are a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties, but I hope everyone has had a blessed and good start to their week, the last week in September, and I hope that everyone has kicked off the week well. I know many of us, this is still a very crazy time, and abanye bethu are still managing Linda ye COVID, but God being our helper, I am sure we will all come out. We'll come out well. Mna igama lam Xhanti Mtulu. I am an attorney based in Cape Town, originally from Port Elizabeth, so I primarily practice in corporate and commercial law. So that is drafting of contracts, that is setting up business structures, assisting entrepreneurs, etc. And that is my passion. But another one of my big passions is to assist Gakumbi, us black people, with what's called marital property regimes. For some people, I know that is a very new word. I know of people who are even married who've never heard of this word before. What is a marital property? What is a marital property regime? And etc. But I'm hoping tonight we can really dive in that. Especially Singabandabacha, I think, sorry for my non-Xhosa speaking brothers and sisters, but especially as young people, I think this thing of marital property regimes is vital, because when we get married, when we want to get married, we just want to dive in, but we never really think of this thing called marital property regime. So basically, long story short, what it is for the subsistence while your marriage is still alive. It's how you treat the assets, whether it be the husband and the wife's, how you treat those assets while the marriage is still alive. So I like to compare it and say, if you have an apple, right? And before you married, I've got my apple, my wife has got her apple. Now we need to find out, what are we going to do with these two apples that we have? I know Abandaba Ninzi like to say things like, oh yeah, no, as a Christian, you must just take that, everything must be one. But I'm sure, and you guys can even let me know in the comments, I'm sure there have been multiple people who've maybe had to deal with a number of problems when it comes to their marital property. So yeah, if we just take it back, your marital property is your joint estate while you are married. The husband's estate together with the wife's estate while the two are still married. And why that is important is because here's an inevitable fact. I know we don't like to admit this, especially when we are or us as black people. We don't like to admit that it's a fact that marriages come to an end, because we like to only think that marriage comes to an end via divorce. Divorce is only one of the ways that a marriage can come to an end. The other way a marriage can come to an end is via death. So your marriage, you technically and legally, you can't be married to a person who's passed on. And I know that might sound very insensitive, because I know in our cultures, you are married till both of you die. But it is simply a fact that once your spouse passes on, you are no longer married. That marriage has come to an end. Now the question becomes, what happens now the marriage has come to an end, whether it be via death or whether it be via divorce? So marriage has come to an end. Me and my spouse had certain things together or had certain things separately, and we don't now know what to do with all these assets. I know for many people, we just continue as normal, as if nothing happened. Down the line, people come claim, no, I've got a right to this and I've got a right to this. And I want to be as frank as possible, as clear as possible, as I would say with any client. Guys, when it comes to death and it comes to the ending of something, it's very easy for it to cause fights. We know this. I hope that everyone watching is an adult. We know this. We've seen it. When everyone was alive, everyone got along, but the second someone passes on, that's when the problems pick up. So in South Africa, we've got two types of marital property regimes. One called in community of property and one called out of community of property. Now, when you're going to get married, right, you and your prospective husband or wife, you're excited, you just want to get married, get so excited that they're like, no, mfundisi, asifuni nix, we just want to go to a vestry, and we'll get it over and done with, without ever thinking what the long-term implications of that will be. So for most people, they married in community of property. And the reason why is because it's just simply easier to get married in community of property, because it's automatic. So if you're signer, and everything's done, beforehand, you married in community of property. And what that means is, remember I spoke about those apples. So the husband comes with an apple, the wife comes with an apple, and they put this apple together. And that's what in community of property is. And they both have a share to this apple. Once the marriage comes to an end, now they have to take that apple and split it to be able to divide between the two parties. There are some disadvantages and there are some advantages when it comes to this. But I want to say this, and remember I said I would be speaking to you guys as if I was speaking to a client, and be very clear and say, when you are going to get married, guys, this is important. You and your prospective spouse need to sit down and speak about this. Speak about what do we want our assets to look like? How do we want, what do we want with the assets to happen? Because very often I have clients walk in, I meet someone and they say, whatever. That time, Utata has a living wife. Has a living wife that is entitled to half of those assets. So this thing with in community of property, so I want to focus here a little bit because this is the most prevalent type of marital property regime. So now the two parties come together, they mix all their stuff becomes one. So when we say in community of property, we say in community of property for profit and loss. So if you guys are getting lost, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to clarify. But in community of property for profit and loss, what that means is any assets you come with into the marriage will be the joint marriage. It will be the joint assets of the marriage. Any debts or liabilities that you incur during the marriage and before the marriage are also part of the joint estate of the marriage. So simply what that means is, now you get married, Omnia is maybe coming with their GTI, Omnia is coming with their house, but what you don't realize when you get married, maybe this other person's got a 350,000 Rand Capitec personal loan. And that you also now become liable for half of that. Just in the same way as you'd be somewhat entitled to half of their assets. So I want to give you guys some practical examples of what I've witnessed, particularly when I was doing law clinic. And some of the practical examples I've witnessed where I had a client who came in, well, not really a client, someone I was actually helping for free. And she came in and she said, Xhanti, I've got a problem. And I said, well, what is this problem? She and her husband got married 10 years ago. During the marriage, her husband loses his job. And he loses his job, and because they're married, they help each other out. It's fine. She works, she helps with her husband, and she supports their household and their 3 kids. One day she gets to work and the receptionist phones her and says, see, there's someone downstairs for you. Ati, what do you mean? And there's no one I'm expecting. And she gets downstairs and it's the sheriff of the court. The sheriff comes to serve legal documents on her to say that you are liable for maintenance. She says, but how am I liable for maintenance? Because all 3 of my children live with me. It turns out, as it does happen, guys, we need to face these facts. As it does happen, during the subsistence of the marriage, the husband had an extramarital affair and had a child out of that affair. Now, the mother of this child comes and claims maintenance from the husband. But remember, because I said that they've got a joint estate, so they've got this one apple, what was the debt of the husband also now becomes her debt. So now she found herself in a situation where she's paying child maintenance for a child she's actually never even met or never even knew existed. So these are the things that are very important to speak about when you enter into this marriage process and deciding whether you want to do in community of property or out of community of property, etc. Another fairly recent example that I've come across, where a young couple, sort of in their early 30s, they get married, they have a very happy marriage, and down the line, what ends up happening is the husband starts a business. He starts a business. This business is successful for the first 3 years. Year 3, the business takes a very big knock, a very, very big knock, and he's left with a 2 million rand SARS liability, and there's other business debts. Now remember, they married in community of property. So before they got married, Usisi had 2 houses: the house that they currently live in as a married couple, and also a house that she had bought for her mother. But now when her husband incurs these debts and can't pay them back, you know how people are when they want their money. They came straight and they took both houses, the house they lived in and the house that her mother lived in. Why? Because of this joint estate, this joint apple. So to people you owe money, it's one entity. They don't differentiate between, oh no, this is the husband's estate or this is the wife's estate. Like I always joke and say, there's nothing you can do about it, and they won't give up until they stop. So guys, I really urge you to sit down and to speak to your partner about what kind of marital property regime you want. And when I say speak to your partner, I really mean that it's actually a private matter. It's just you and your partner. Don't involve sisters and brothers and cousins and aunts and uncles, because it complicates the process. And quite frankly, it's also none of their business. So yeah, I always say, sit down, you speak to your partner. Now, the second type of marital property regime we have in South Africa is called out of community of property. Now, out of community of property has 2 streams. Stream 1 is what we call out and out community of property. Stream 2 is called out of community of property with accrual. So I'm going to start with stream 1, which is out and out community of property. This is the type of community of property where what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. There's no shared assets, there's no shared liabilities. So your debts stay your debts. your assets stay your assets. And what that does is, if anyone in the marriage now incurs a debt, maybe starts a business and the business doesn't go well, the people that they owe money can only come after the person who incurred the debt, unlike in community of property. So that's where it's really important to make that distinction. So there's an upside and a downside to this. The downside is that if you, let's say you're one of the spouses and you decide I'm going to stay at home rather and look after the kids and rather build the home, and maybe the other spouse decides that they're going to be the breadwinner. For some or other reason, the marriage comes to an end. Now, as the spouse who stayed at home, you didn't really accumulate any assets. Now you're kind of left without anything. So this really works only if the two parties know that they're both going to work, they're both going to build whatever resources they want to build. I also might even pause there and add this, that for you to be married out of community of property, you need what's called an antenuptial contract. So this is why a lot of people don't want to do it, because you have to go see a lawyer. And before you get married, you sign this antenuptial contract, which is basically a marriage contract before you get married. You go see a lawyer and they draft this for you, and then you sign. What's really important, guys, and I can't stress this enough, what is incredibly important is that you sign this antenuptial contract before you get married. So remember, I used the example, you can't now be excited, you decide on Saturday that yes, Tuesday, so and once the excitement's died down, you think, hey, wow, I should have gotten an antenuptial contract. Unfortunately, it's a little too late because this needs to be signed before the marriage takes place. Very recent case law has also said that what often happens is that when you get married under customary law, so now you start ilobola negotiations, and from the time that any money is paid at the lobola negotiations, the courts have interpreted that as being that you have now gotten married. I mean, it's very debatable, because I know that in different cultures it works different ways. It's not like that. It's not like that. But for many people have found themselves in the situation, and they like, oh no, the lobola negotiations maybe didn't materialize, but 50 randi, and the court says no, actually you are married. Now the problem that poses is that if you didn't enter into an antenuptial contract before that day, you are automatically in community of property. Because remember, I said that you need to enter into your antenuptial contract before the marriage takes place. So guys, please also be aware of that, and please remember that if you're going to enter into a customary marriage, please guys, make sure, and you want to be married out of community of property, make sure you get that marriage contract done beforehand. And yes, and this is also a bit off topic, but I think it's also very important to say this, that if you have already been married, in terms of customary law, please don't delay. Go to Home Affairs and get your customary law marriage registered, because I've seen many an instance where people are married under customary law and they never get it registered, and then when their spouse dies, all of a sudden it's hi zange bachate. So please guys, get that sorted out. And then and guys, if you have any questions, please ask me in the comments. I'll try to answer here. Generally I would charge for this, but if you ask in the comments, I will try my best to answer. Then the last of the types of ways you can get married is what we call out of community of property with accrual. If I'm honest, this is probably my favorite, because what out of community of property with accrual says, that I come with my apple, my spouse comes with her apple, and when we get married, we stay with our separate apples. So if I incur my debt, I need to pay back my debt out of my apple. If she incurs her debt, she needs to pay back her debt out of her apple. And if anything happens, if one of us goes under debt review or anything like that, both of our apples are still separate, so it doesn't impact the other person. Unlike in community of property, if one of you goes under debt review, automatically both of you are under debt review, because Galoko, remember, in community of property you've got the joint apple. But if you've got these separate apples, for outer community of property with accrual, now the marriage comes to an end. And remember, I said to you, your marriage can come to an end via death or divorce. The marriage comes to an end. The person with the bigger apple, right? That some of the portion of their apple will be used to patch the growth in their apple. Klambi, their apple started like this and it grew like this. The growth in their apple will then be used to patch up the other spouse, so that whatever the couple acquired whilst they were married, whatever the couple acquired whilst they were married, then forms part of the accrual. The accrual system sounds very complicated, but I promise you it is not complicated. I like to say that the accrual system is sort of your best of both worlds. It feels like in community of property, but it has the benefits of out of community of property. Because while the marriage is still alive, you still have the benefits of in community and out of community of property. So now, if one of the spouses, let's say, gets sued and it's a crippling amount of money, that person only gets sued in their name. That person only gets sued in their name. They don't get sued in both the name of the couple. So guys, what I always say to people is, really sit down, figure out what works for you, and like don't fall. Like I know like there's sometimes peer pressure about no, we only do in community of property or this, that, and the other. People who tell me things like, oh, getting married out of community of property is not Christian. I always say to them, in fact, I don't even debate with them, because they will cause you a whole bunch of heartbreak, and then when the marriage comes to an end, they're nowhere to be seen. So I love Umamuma Kwengwe saying that out of community of property with accrual. That's also my favorite, because it gives you the protection, but it also gives you the feel of in community of property. And while I'm waiting for your questions, okay, so I have a question from Ulwandisa. Ulwandisa says, what is the amount range on drafting the contracts? I'm thinking maybe, yeah, okay. So the amount range is, I would say, budget about, and look, different lawyers charge different things. Budget about 3,500 Rand. Budget that, and once you've budgeted that, it will help you be able to, even the months before, to put a little bit away. You can even negotiate with your lawyer and say, look, maybe even after the wedding, we'll still pay you off, etc., etc. Some lawyers are open to do that. Budget about 3,500 Rand. I've heard, but that's for like a fairly standard, simple one. I've heard of some lawyers charging an obscene amounts of money. I would say that if you, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this, but if you hear sort of more than 5,000 Rand, some red flags should go off for you, because then potentially you're being overcharged. So budget about 3,500 Rand. I know some lawyers who do it for 1,500 Rand. I know some lawyers who do it for 2,000 Rand, etc. But yeah, and also just maybe I would advise that you go to a lawyer physically, because I've seen some websites that will say 500 Rand for an antenuptial contract, that is also a red flag, because what they'll do is they'll say they'll do this antenuptial contract for you online. You go sign online. When you go buy a house, you find out that actually you're married in community of property. So also go to a reputable lawyer. Yeah, that's around what you would pay. So we've got Usista saying, do you also have to sign a contract before getting married for out of community of property with accrual? Yes. So for out of community of property with accrual and just out and out community of property, both you need your antenuptial contract. That's very, very, very important. You need your antenuptial contract for both of them, which needs to be signed before the wedding. So if you are having, if you maybe are doing the lobola process, I would advise that get your contract signed before you start the process. If you're just having a normal, well, not normal, because our African weddings are just as normal as any Western weddings. If you are having sort of a civil marriage, you should get that signed also before your wedding day. We have, oh, let's see what else. So I have a question, can we do it digitally? Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to that stage yet. So it's best to honestly sign by hand. Yeah, honestly to sign by hand, because yeah, you just don't want to take any risks with things like that. Okay. Love money. Okay, one of the many things that stood out to me is, why is it vital to talk about marriage contracts with your partner? Yeah. Okay, so we've got a comment saying that it's very wise to speak to your partner about your marriage contract. And yeah, if there's no other... Okay, so let's see. Okay, so we've got a question regarding child maintenance when you are out of community of property. So if someone gets a judgment against your spouse, and let's say they have to pay child maintenance, if you are out of community of property, whether it's just out and out community of property, or whether it's out of community of property with accrual, that child maintenance is theirs. So it doesn't impact you. So what I always say is, when you're married out of community of property, is that you guys have your own separate legal identities. When it's in community of property, unfortunately, you somewhat share a legal identity, and so when someone sues you, they sue you in both names. Okay. There's a question around live-in partners for more than 6 months being declared as legally married. Look, that one is a bit of a difficult one, because you get people who cohabit and live in marriage-like relationships, and when that cohabitation comes to an end, they go to court to sue each other as if it were a marriage. There's instances, yes, where that cohabitation can be viewed similar to a marriage, or people who live in sort of similar in civil partnerships where it seemed to be similar to a marriage. I always say that, especially it's easier to say this in where we're all Christians. If you're wanting to cohabit with your partner, set yourself a time limit. To be honest, I wouldn't advise cohabiting with anyone you're not married with, but that's my personal opinion, and that is my local preacher opinion. But as a lawyer, I would say that if you're going to cohabit with anyone, please guys, set yourself a time limit. Otherwise, you'll find yourself cohabiting for 10 years and you never see a ring, you never get married, because the person is getting the benefits of marriage without having to sign a marriage contract. Next thing is one is if one has already gotten married, can they change to out of community of property? So this is a yes, primarily a yes answer, but it's also a no answer. And the reason why I say this is because it's quite expensive, relatively expensive to change to outer community of property. The reason being is because you need to make a high court application. So you need to get an advocate who's going to move your high court application. And there's certain things you need to prove, like you're not trying to scam creditors or anything like that. When you're trying to move from in community of property to out of community of property. So it's possible, but it's quite pricey. I've heard of other lawyers doing this. Personally, I wouldn't advise it, where people get decide that they're going to legally divorce and get remarried in out of community of property. That poses also poses a lot of risks, because if anything happens whilst you guys are divorced, even if it's divorced for a week, if anything happens, you guys will have seen as being divorced. So unfortunately, if you're already married in community of property, it is a bit difficult unless you have the funds to get a high court application. So we have another question: can a wife be liable for child maintenance of her for her spouse if married out of community of property with accrual? That is no, because remember, if you're out of community of property, you have your separate apples. So that child maintenance must come from the husband's apple. And the wife, remember, has her own estate. Yeah, if we don't have any more questions, if we don't have any more questions, I'll close this off. But I want to also encourage everyone who's on here, and maybe admin, if you're here, or any of the team from Wesley Guild SA, we should even chat about wills someday. Your last will and testament, because I also am finding more and more that people are passing away without having a will, and it creates an incredible stress left over for the family. So guys, please, if you can, do a will. Most banks offer that they can do your will for you. But please guys, I urge everyone who's listening, please do a will. It leaves people in a very awkward situation when people don't have a will. And effectively it just leaves more room for people to fight, more room for people to argue. So, and the last thing, I would like to encourage any ministers who are listening to this, that in your pre-marriage counseling, maybe, I'm not sure what it's like. I know the minister that did our pre-marriage counseling with my wife and I, he did mention this thing of the different marital property regimes. But I also encourage our ministers, when you do your pre-marriage counseling with a couple, to mention this to the couple, to say, look, we've got different marital property regimes in South Africa, and it's really important that you know what's what and how it will affect your assets. I know you may not be an expert in this area, but I think it would really serve the congregation well to be able to be educated in this, because I often find in our communities that unfortunately we lack a lot of knowledge when it comes to this. We lack a lot of knowledge when it comes to this, because we just go in, see chart there, and 10-15 years down the line we're in a bit of a predicament. And yeah, I think the last question, if no one else has a question: what happens when you get divorced and you buy a house together out of community of property? The question's a bit ambiguous. So are you assuming that, or are you saying that you'd been divorced before, or buying and then bought a new house with your spouse? Or, okay, I think I know what you're saying. So I'm going to interpret your question to say, what happens if you bought a house together, and you're out of community of property and you get divorced? So remember when you buy a house, right? Even if it's out of community of property, you and your spouse can still buy the house together, 50-50. Or if only the one spouse wants to buy the house, that can happen too. But if you buy the house together, it can be 50-50, then when you get divorced, unfortunately, you're going to have to divide that house. So it's either one spouse is going to have to pay out the other spouse's share, or they sell the house and split the assets, or split the proceeds of that sale. So yes, don't feel that just because you're married out of community of property that only one spouse has to buy the house or buy the big ticket items. You can still have both of your names put on the property. Then we have another question. Can children of a husband that is married in community of property, being born before he was married, claim his estate when he passes away? Yes. So this is, I won't go too deep into this one, because maybe this one we should have like a separate live when we deal with intestate succession and wills, etc. But essentially, you when you married in community of property, and even if you've got children before, your duty to maintain children outlives your death, if I can put it that way. So you have a duty to maintain your child dead or alive. So how you maintain your child when you're dead is that from your estate, a portion of your estate then gets set aside to maintain that child. So if you're in community of property, yes, they'll cut down the estate, give the wife and the husband, the wife her share, and then from the share that's left over, then every person who's to inherit from that share will then be given their share from that. And even children who are from the husband before he got married, children while he was married, etc. Yeah, so that's also really important, that marriage, and this is rightfully so, marriage doesn't make you run away from your parental responsibilities to maintain your child. So ladies, if the person, maybe the father of your child, goes ahead and says, well, I'm married now, I can't maintain the child, contest that. He still has an obligation to maintain his child that he had before he was married, or maybe outside of the marriage, just as he maintains the children within the marriage. So please, guys, don't fall for that trap. I've had many people that fall into the situation where their husbands or their children's fathers simply don't want to maintain anymore, simply because they got married. That is unacceptable. Your duty to maintain your child outlasts whether you're married or unmarried, etc. Yeah, so it seems that we do not have any more questions. And yeah, I just encourage you guys to please, even if you're already married in community of property, go do some research, see what that means for you. If you're planning on getting married, I always would say, back at my home circuit, if you're planning on getting married, please figure out your marital property regime and discuss that with your potential husband. Okay, so last question. If we buy a house together when married out of community of property and no one wants to be bought out, are we forced to stay together because we are both owners? So this is a very interesting one. I have seen instances where a couple divorces, but they don't want to sell the house. Couple divorces and they don't want to sell the house, and they stay together. Omnia une room yake, omnia une room yake, omnia une fridge yake, omnia une fridge yake, umdune sitlo yake, etc., etc. That's not ideal. I can say that is not ideal. But if the one person does not want to be bought out, if the person doesn't want to be bought out, ultimately it comes to an ultimatum, and at that stage, I would assume that the divorce sort of has a bit of argument, and it would probably end up going the court direction. So at that stage, you would need to negotiate, and like it's ultimately the house is sold or they bought out. You can't have the best of both worlds. But yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this was informative. I hope this helps you in future. Thanks.